Welcome to the Demi Taste Podcast, where we do a little bit of tasting and a lot of talking. I am your host with a mouth both for tasting and for talking. I go by Demi Tastes. You can call me Doug. I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, Duckville Platypus. I need to come up with some kind of epithet for you, Phil, since I've got my whole mouth for tasting and for talking. Uh, we'll figure it out later.
Yeah,
And
somewhat.
today, our special guest is Amanda Beckwith of Virginia Distilling Company, head blender, if I'm not mistaken, is her title. And she's going to talk to us about the brand in general, about blending whiskey from 3 different types of casks, possibly more, um, and the American Single Malt Academy from Virginia Distilling Company, where she features prominently as the educator, which is quite fun. And people's certificates have been popping up all around the internet. So that's been like a nice little buzz. So welcome, Amanda. Thanks for joining us. How are you today?
I am well. Thanks for having me.
I could say we are super excited to have you because Phil has been a fan of craft distilling in Virginia and American single malt, and of y'all in particular for a very long time. And I couldn't be more tickled to have accidentally created a venue where I could put you and Phil in the same room together. So,
Hi.
oh boy, now I've made Phil all self-conscious. I
Yeah,
apologize,
yeah.
but it's going to be
Just a
great.
little bit.
We're old friends now.
Yeah. Um, I've
So, yeah, go ahead.
I've been I've been a pretty big fan of the Virginia Distilling Company for a long time. In fact, I think I'm on my third or fourth bottle of this. I think third or fourth. I honestly can't remember. Um, and it's really cool to see how much recognition a Virginia distillery is getting, both within the United States and internationally, and encountering online people who are seeing courage and conviction and want to know if it's something that they should try. And
Mm.
the answer, of course, is yes. Um, but I have been accused of being biased.
It's been a fun journey. That whiskey was the very first one we rolled out, the port cask finish. It was originally almost entirely sourced from Scotland. So it was a Scottish malt we would finish in Virginia. And over the past 8 years, we've been transitioning it more and more of our own distillate. And a bit of news this year, we are completely transitioning over, and I'm doing a VDC, American single malt, instead of the VHW blended malt.
That is extremely exciting.
Yeah.
Oh, I have so many questions about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually I thought maybe we would get into that bottling a little bit later, if anything, because we are, at least, I mostly want to talk about American single malt. Now I realize that that's a personal bias, but it also makes sense to go in chronological order. So I was thinking of that as sort of a transitional thing of like there's the sourced whiskey that you deal with, and there's the American single malt whiskey that you make, and then there's this product that's a marriage of the two. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's interesting to know that that may be going away, though.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a matter of time. It's been one of those things where we knew for the past half decade this was the goal. We set out to get people talking about barley and single malts and telling the story of old world style meeting new. And I think that the port cask finished whiskey really told that story in a beautiful way. And over the years, it's been a challenge to take it on because I originally was not the blender. We were working with Nancy Fraley back in 2015. And so she came on site a couple times and helped. And that was the whiskey she did originally, the port and cider. She gave a lot of feedback on. And I created a sensory panel to kind of take it over. And over the years, it became my baby to try to change it and do it in a way that the DNA was the same. The flavor profile was going to be consistent for people who were already fans of it, and to set up VDC, American Single Malt, to be hopefully even better than the VHW.
So, what does the VHW stand for, if you don't mind me asking? And this may be kind of a naive question because if it says it on the bottle, I'll be embarrassed.
Well, it actually had a bunch of iterations. Back in the day, it was Virginia Highland Malt Whiskey, VHM. And we went through a couple name changes. The TTB wanted it to be with a hyphen, Virginia Highland Whiskey. And then the Scotch Whisky Association actually sued us for the use of Highland. It's funny because I live right next door to Highland County, Virginia, but we
Yeah.
didn't want people to be thinking it was a single malt from Scotland. We wanted to make sure it was an American whiskey. So we were happy to change it. We'd already been planning it out for the transition. So VHW was the next step into the transition to VDC, which is short for, of course, Virginia Distillery Company.
Okay, so it's one of those acronyms that used to stand for something kind of, and then now it's
Exactly.
just VHW.
Yep.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so could we possibly pry into where that scotch is from?
Legally, we always wanted to keep it something that was proprietary, and I believe I'm one of only two people in the entire company that knows where it came from. I'll tell you, it actually was the Speyside region, not Highland. um, and
That narrows it down while opening it up tremendously.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That goes from a list of about 60 distilleries to a list of about 80.
I know.
Which isn't accurate numbers. It's just the Highlands is the largest region, but Speyside is the most dense in terms of distillery placement.
Yes. Yeah. Other clues I can give: when we were getting started, we had 3 mentor distillers from Scotland, and they had great ties to different distilleries in Scotland and helped with a lot of relationships, not only there, but with cooperages and bodegas around the world. So we had a very lucky in to be able to source that whiskey. The youngest we ever brought over was 6 year. Most of it was 12 and older. And it was not peated, but the water source that they used did have some ppm in there. And I think that's all I can give you.
So was that was the watering whiskey, or the watering water, like the proofing water, or was it
that was their proofing water, and also their water for distillation, and their hot water.
We're gonna go way off on a tangent here, but I saw a Lafroig ad at some point, or something along those lines, where they were talking about how the water, adds a certain peatiness to the whiskey.
It does, depending on where they're getting their water from. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, but don't you distill it? And wouldn't that kind of
yes,
leave a lot of that flavor behind?
Yeah, that would be the way it would really carry through.
I always kind of assumed, and I honestly didn't ever check this fact, at least not for Scotland. I always kind of assumed that the proofing water was going to be pretty much as neutral as you could get.
Not necessarily. Ours happens to be very neutral. It's kind of shocking. We have water here at our distillery, kind of similar to like the Czech Republic. If we were kind of mapping it out, we send samples off, and the pH is incredibly neutral, which works for us.
Now I'm wondering if I have a sample of that one. I for some reason, I didn't do a good job of cataloging my VADC samples.
Oh.
And I'm the sort of person who has a collection of samples for various reasons. And this is one where I'm never sure what I have, because I've always assumed I've gotten a million things from Phil. But what I walked you through what I have earlier, that's all I could find. So I'm going to assume that's all I have. But Phil, I think, will be able to speak to more of the different expressions than I can, definitely.
Yes. I only have a couple more. I have a newer iteration of the flagship Courage and Conviction from after the batching was phased out, or the named batching was phased out.
Yep.
And I have a sample of the cider cask because I bought a bottle of that for a friend, and he kindly insisted that I take a sample of it.
Fun. Yeah, nice. The cider was our second release ever. We did a couple limited ones, like a Chardonnay finish and a beer cask finish, kind of showing off local Virginia wineries, cideries, breweries was our vision there. And then our very first batch of American single malt was the Courage and Conviction. It came out in April of 2020. and I picked 37 barrels for it, I believe. So it's very small, and it grew very quickly. But the idea was to kind of, for the first set of bottling runs for both that, and then in 2021, the line extensions, just to give an homage to mentors along the way, or people who touched us. And yeah, it was fun to do that. Not sustainable because now I have a massive vatting house, and so we're pulling from the same tanks that I built in, and the idea is to never drop below a certain line. So it's like a Solera that I'm blending into, and I've been doing that for 2 years now.
That's really sort of where I was hoping to sort of steer the conversation, because we've had distillers on and we've talked about distilling, but blending is a separate art, and it is sort of, it is a skill that you build, but it's amazing to like listen to someone talk about it, because it is an art, and it is, and we'd like to learn more about it from you.
Yeah, we are in complete agreement about that, Phil. That's exactly what I was thinking. We could go all the way back to the beginning and talk about grain and distillation and all that, but we've heard that a dozen times. And in stuff that we've listened to, we've heard that dozens of times. But blending is something that is mostly sort of hidden behind the scenes, right? You don't often get to hear from people who actually do that as their main focus in their day job. At least, I assume as head blender, that is your main focus. But you could correct me if I'm wrong, that you do some other stuff.
Yeah, I wear a lot of hats. It makes it fun. But blending is what I think about from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep. I mean, eating and dogs and chocolate, of course, factor in a lot. But but yeah, for me, I think it's an odd amalgamation of art and creativity, and then science and math. And there is a lot of math and calculating that goes into every single day. And I think that the ability to bridge those two aspects of the science and math and the art really help, because if you ignore one, you could lose consistency and the ability to harness technology in a cool way. But by being able to really tap into sensory and yeah, the creativity of it all, you can think outside the box too and push for things to be better and more developed. So you don't get hung up in this little, I have to do this step, then this step, then this step. You can keep reevaluating. And I like the idea that I'm learning, I'm getting more data, and hopefully I'll be, growing for years to come.
Awesome. So you mentioned that you weren't there from the very beginning, correct?
I came in 2015. So April 2015, we started to build the visitor center. Yeah, it was a hole in the ground in 2015. By July, we had a rough framework, and I was on site by then, really in August. I was on site every day, and we turned on our stills for the trial run in October. And by November, our visitor center was open, and we were maturing our own whiskey. So yeah, I was there for all that, the first drafts coming off the still. But before us, there were a couple years of building and bringing in the experts, and I still got to work with the gentleman from Scotland and Nancy Fraley, of course. But yeah, I wasn't there for the original inception of it all.
So was there ever any releases that were Scotch only, like the sourced?
Yes. Yeah, they were called Eads because the predecessor brand name was Eads for the lane that our distillery is on. And they were double malts. And by doing that, because legally a single malt in Scotland has to go through all these things, and you have to teaspoon something else for it to come over and be bottled in a different country. And we did this double malt thing. And so we would say on the label the two distilleries that the single malts came from. And it would be regional, and it was fun. I think we released 7 all told. I might have 1 or 2 bottles somewhere, and they were fun, but they were very limited, and it was just based on relationships we had, and it was fun. And then we did a single barrel from a couple of different places around the world. We call it the Journey Cask, and we were just showcasing single malts and what they can be like in England or Ireland. It was a lot of fun doing that. But yeah,
so is this There, I have a friend who asked me if I could ask you about this particular release. Um, Let me see if I can read the label because it's kind of a small picture. It says single barrel. I can't make out the barrel number. Maybe it was 2247. And it says whiskey finished or aged in ex bourbon and muscatel.
Yeah. Oh, that is a
So
crazy one. So that is all Scotch too, or Scottish malt. But we finished it and turned it into a second maturation. So we got whiskey. It was really like a 12-year-old, but to be safe, we just said 6 year. It came from that distillery in Speyside. We brought it over across the Atlantic and moved it directly into a muscatel cask we thought to finish. And I kept checking on it and it wasn't quite there, wasn't quite there. It ended up being almost 7 years. So true second maturation in Virginia in the muscatel cask. I had 4 of them. That was it. And I loved them. And the team right before Christmas asked for something fun and unique that they could do a couple special single barrels out. And so, yeah, December, I sent some samples and they went fast. So technically not a Scotch,
Technically,
second maturation here in the US. But yeah.
did you
I
forget
don't know
to
if you can
mute?
hear me, but I can't hear you. So I'm going to drop and rejoin.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So on that note, of cask selections and stuff, and being in Virginia, I've seen a couple of the sort of special releases available to VA ABC or from VA ABC. Do you work with um, representatives of VA ABC? Like, do they come in and do cask samples with you guys?
Yeah, we have a wonderful gentleman, John Alvarez, and he handles our relationship with control states. And so he will set up a tour with members of the Virginia ABC board. Joy came last time, and I remember like we really geeked out together. And I took them up into the cask houses and I pulled samples, and they wanted everything they tried. So, yeah, we have quite a few special selections that have gone through Virginia ABC. And I think they have fun coming out and getting to pick. And I always love having guests up in the cask house. So it's fun. They've done some sherry, some cuvee casks, and I think 1 or 2 bourbon casks as well.
Sadly, I have no idea what I just missed because
Oh, we
my
were
audio
talking
went
single
out for
barrel
a couple of
picks.
minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I usually find when I'm doing sensory, I'll pull samples from different casks throughout the year, kind of be grading them and keeping an eye on them. And some I just feel like are standouts that I would have at cask strength. I don't want them reduced. I don't want them blended out. So I kind of keep a honey cask tracker. And so when people want to come, whether it's from Virginia ABC or from a liquor store in Texas, I love getting to bring them up and let them try for themselves.
So
So I apologize if you've already answered this, but the picture I was looking at, I believe, says 11 or 12 years on the label. That one I was
11.
talking about the
Yeah.
bourbon.
It was like
Yeah.
1 week shy before bottling of hitting 12 years, but we went with 11.
Okay. And sorry, the question that I was asked to ask is if we could find out where the scotch in that one came from, because, like you mentioned, it's either teaspooned or double malt or something like that, and you used to write them on the bottle. I thought maybe we'd have a chance.
Yeah, no, that one is entirely the same distillery in Scotland in the Speyside region that I mentioned before. So all my clues still hold, but I can't tell you,
Okay,
sadly.
cool. All right, I've asked all of the questions, and now we can move on from that hot potato.
so the next sort of question about blending is when, because everyone's seen the pictures of like the blending room at Waterford or at Balcones, that is just essentially a sealed room full of little labeled sample bottles, how often do you have to go through your selection of samples and go, there isn't any more of this barrel left, or figure out how to declutter your space?
This is a very authentic question that I relate to in a deep level. I'm pretty good at cleaning and organizing. But yeah, I feel like, well, I used to call my whiskey collection Hydra, but really those sample bottles are Hydra. I remove one and five more have sprung to take its place, and I don't know how. People send me samples all the time from other places too, so I have places for that. It's really a problem, but I love education and I love sharing with our team. So I have a sensory panel. Three other people are on it, and I do a weekly blind nosing for them. And I love to work in some of those extra samples that I need to get rid of anyway. It's a great way to do that. And I'll send samples home with other people too. And then I try to do a whiskey EDU for the entire on-site team whenever I can, usually once a month. And that's another great way to move through samples that I'm done with. Yeah. It's a big part of my week though, cleaning up.
I relate to that problem, the Hydra problem. That's a great way to describe it, right? I feel
Oh,
like my number of samples only grows, my number of bottles only grows, and I'm at this point I'm brainstorming how am I ever going to get rid of this stuff.
yeah. Well, I
I'm
just
in the
started.
position it's not exactly legal for me to like there's a lot of ways that I could potentially get rid of it that is not legal. And there's only a few ways I could do it that would be legitimate. That's what I'm brainstorming on.
Yeah. Well, there are four other women in the American single malt world that I meet up with now once a month, and we'll try to get each other samples. And it might be like, oh, one of us is going to a convention, the other one's going to, or whatever, and then there'll be a swap. But yeah, it's really fun to be able to share that way too. And we go through, gosh, this time we're meeting on Monday, and I think we have like 30 samples each to go through. Yeah.
Wow. That sounds like a version of the bottle share parties that I go to once a quarter. Everybody brings 2, 3, or
Yep.
5 bottles of stuff, puts it on the table, and at some point you have to decide what not to drink because
Exactly. I'm gonna nose this one. I'll come back to it tomorrow.
Yep.
Yep.
I've been sharing my whiskey with friends at D&D and come to the unfortunate conclusion that as great as that is as a way to sort of distribute my whiskey, it's not nearly fast enough.
What do you play? I have to know your character now.
Currently, I'm playing a halfling bard named Going Boldly. That's not his real name. That's his stage name.
My last character's named Valerian Vox, and she was a sorcerer, and I miss playing.
Okay, Doug, we're gonna have to do like a D&D with distillers and blenders.
Yep.
I've
Bartlemy,
done
throw a high
sessions
sign
with
in
my
chat if
team.
you're in for a D&D campaign.
When COVID started, I started playing virtually, and then picked back up with some of our team at the distillery. And Marion Cunningham, one of our distillers, reminds me once a month, when is our next session? It's been too long.
So I'm going to start keeping a list. Phil has done a wonderful one-off campaign session, I guess, for the Whiskey Lodge, which we did on voice chat and actually worked extremely well. And it was set in a dwarven distillery, so it was very on brand for our style of
I
content.
love that. Amazing.
Bartlemy's in. Okay, so now we have Phil and me and Amanda Beckwith and Caitlin Bartlemy ready to kick off a D&D campaign.
So Caitlin and I are in that group that's meeting on Monday.
Nice. So I'm gonna just pencil that in for like let's say one Thursday a month. We
I love it.
just gonna sign everybody up. That feels like a really fun thing that we could do on this channel.
Right?
Everybody's got a bit, and we've been trying some bits. We used to talk about coffee pretty much every time we went live, and that kind of got old because mostly I drink the same coffee, and I'm the only one drinking coffee anyway. But Oh, I was talking with Alex on Tuesday about whether we could do a Between Two Stills parody of Between Two Ferns.
I love it. Yeah.
So anytime I walk into a distillery and I see two stills next to each other, I'm like, I should do it.
Get two
So
chairs, put them right
yeah,
there.
Ask a bunch
so
of
we're workshopping content. D&D is very authentic to us. It's we like the minimal prep, casual, like authentic conversation type of stuff. So D&D is on brand for us. Between Two Stills is not so much a natural thing for us to do.
I
I
mean,
think I just saw Joe wrote a comment. Was that our
no,
Joe or
that
was
was
that somebody?
friend. That was a spam comment. And so I
Oh, it was a
deleted it.
spam. Okay, cool. Well, I didn't read it. Cool, excellent.
Yeah, I've been
Whoever
keeping an eye on it.
moderated that, good job.
Thank you.
All right, so maybe let's get back on topic, or we can
I
keep
see
talking
a
about
question from
D&D.
Richard.
Yeah, that is actually that's a good question. Let's
Okay,
put
yeah,
that.
he
It's on
wants to know
topic.
how much of the blending is planned on paper and you work to make it work, or more trial and error thinking this and this would go well. So there is a lot of foundational, I know the profile I'm looking for, and there's a lot of these are components that should work. And often it's a build and then make adjustments on the back end, finesse it to get exactly where I want it to be. And so paper for like the first 80%, I've got all the data points. I know what I'm working with. And then that last 20% is a lot more. I pulled my samples, I'm trialing it out. I'm doing it blind. I'm doing my triangle tests, trying to hone in and get it exactly where it should be.
This is the first time triangle test has come up on this stream, so I wonder if you could elaborate a little on what that is.
Yeah. So, for example, the VHW port cask finish sample that Phil had. What I literally did 2 weeks ago was I had the sample of what I was working on. I had what was pulled from the vat and what was actually bottled previously. So I had 3 different samples, had them mixed up, and I had to go through and find it. And then I made the whole sensory panel do the exact same thing, dialing in which one of these is not like the other. Is this one a little bit different from that one? What are we kind of noticing from nuance? And having those pillars when you're really refining it down is crucial. Because I'm always wanting the whiskey to be better than the time before, but I never want somebody to reach for a bottle, take it home and go, hey, this is nothing like what I had before. The DNA, the core of it has to be consistent.
So that gets at my next sort of question, which was how close do you intend each of the batches to be?
Well, we no longer do batching, and part of that is I build in a Solera. And so I'm never emptying it out. I'm working with some what I call middleman vats. So I'll bring the barrels in, I'll go ahead and vat them. I'll start with my reductions. And once I think it's there, then I'll do my side by side and then move it into that final product tank before it goes into bottling. So it's step by step by step along the way to get it closer and closer and then get it all added together.
Nice. So that's the second time that we've heard Solera come up on this podcast, and I think there will be more.
Yeah.
So we had Murphy Quint on, and of course we talked about the quintessential blend. I believe I had batch 13. So
look at
yeah,
that.
I saw that behind you. I wasn't sure. I wasn't 100% sure if that was that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of ASMs over here. I'm a fan of them
Nice.
all.
I'm gonna have to display it better. I was just talking about like I put all these bottles behind me, and then I realized that my head blocks them, so
Oh, yeah.
I need to put them that way. Anyways, so there's also the Stranahan's Blue Peak. So Solera systems for sort of standard releases of American single malts seem to be not uncommon. I would say getting more common even.
I
But
think
what
a
was
lot of
interesting about Murphy's is his philosophy for it was that it's okay for it to be a little different batch to batch. You have the DNA of the previous one and you've got something different in the next batch.
yeah, different styles, different approaches, and his is completely legitimate. And I would say he's more of an artist because of that than I am. Yeah, my approach is going to be a little bit more of the concrete, numerical based, trying to match up. And then I think it'd be a lot of fun to do one-offs that could be very creative. And I'll be doing that every year. I'll do a visionary release, and that's just creative, very fun, small batch. But yeah, for the core Courage and Conviction line, I don't think I'll ever be changing it up too much.
So there's
Just
the
trying to
art
dial
view
in.
and there's the science view. Yeah. And you get to do a little bit of both. And art and
Yeah,
science are
for
really,
sure.
science is an art and art is science and so on.
Yeah, but to go back to the Solera, I think a lot of us came from other backgrounds, whether it was the beer world or wine. And for me, I have a lot of brandy background in my training. And so that's informed a lot of my techniques. But studying sherry production and the Solera was hugely inspirational and made a lot of sense. And it definitely was playing in the back of my mind 6, 7 years ago. And finally getting a batting house where I can really do it full scale has been a dream come true.
We keep talking about the vatting house or the blending house. I
Yeah.
guess what I'm imagining is what I've seen in videos more often than not. This warehouse that's got barrels stacked 5 or 6 rows high that looks like a really spacious and just like utterly huge aging warehouse. Is that the vatting room or is the vatting room a completely different place?
It is a completely different place. So we have two metal clad cask houses full of barrels aging 6 pallets high. We have some on racks too, but for the most part, it is palletized. And then the vatting house is a metal clad warehouse full of massive tanks that can hold 10,000, 15,000 liters of aged whiskey. And that's where the reductions in circulation can take place. And then I literally have a piping system that runs outside the vatting house and connects to a tank inside our bottling house. And that holding tank is where we'll do our final check on ABV, and then we'll direct it right onto the bottling line for the team to bottle. So it's really fun. It's a little bit like Willy Wonka's whiskey factory. And it's really convenient to have all that space because before that was built, I was taking over the washbacks or fermentation tanks inside the distillery. They're just stainless steel fermentation tanks. And I think that the distillers were being very gracious. But at one point, I had taken over 4 of them, and I think that they were feeling the the need for more space.
So, okay, let's talk about the barrels a little bit. So, I sort of led with there's 3 different types of barrels, and where that's coming from, of course, is the focus of the Courage and Conviction line to have ex-bourbon casks and the Cuvée SDR casks and the sherry, not necessarily all the same type of sherry. Oloroso and PX and Fino, I believe, are
Yeah,
all in the mix. I did my homework.
you
That
did. I'm
that
impressed.
certificate hasn't arrived yet, but I earned it.
Love it.
So you've got those 3 types of casks, but you've also mentioned other types of casks like cider cask and so on. How many different types of casks do you regularly work with?
Ooh, in a given week, I'll touch at least 12 different types of cask. But yeah, the core Courage and Conviction line is primary maturation in 3 different sherry, which you mentioned, the Cuvée red wine casks and the first fill bourbon. And the other main line, the VDC line, is more cask finishing. So these are whiskeys that have first aged in the first fill bourbon barrels, then moved over into different beers, wine, cider. That's when the creativity comes through, different wine finishes, and yeah, the idea there is it's a different product, different ABV even now, and it's just fun to be able to showcase different things. Ooh, when we were getting started, one of our mentors was Dr. Jim Swan. And he was this maturation expert, and he said, "Get all the sherry you can and experiment and see what works." So we did get Amontillado, Manzanilla. We played around, and the things that I was used to were Oloroso and Pedro Jimenez. But the Fino turned out to be a late bloomer that I fell in love with. And so having those 3 core sherry types to play with, I've been able to get a lot of nuance and depth into the whiskey. So those are the core 3. But yes, I have a few Amontillado casks floating around.
So as we
Cool
talk
to
more and more
learn
about
all about.
sherry, I'm reminded that I've been threatening Phil and Ian to do a sherry episode, which was gonna be just us talking because we figured out, we're probably not gonna find an industry person who knows a ton about all the different styles of sherry, but
I volunteer as tribute.
maybe, maybe we have Amanda back to lead that discussion because having a professional touch on that would be way better than just, yes, it tastes
I'd have a
like.
blast.
Okay, so now I'm justified in procrastinating that episode. See, Phil.
Just say when.
I'm
Awesome.
taking notes.
Yep.
I literally have
Oh.
3 sherry bottles within arm's reach right here. So
Yeah. Here's another bit. We used to write all of our episode ideas on sticky notes.
love it.
Did Sherry ever make it onto here?
Yes.
Sherry did not make it onto this sticky
Really?
note. That's because I was so committed to doing it eventually. And I mean that I'm not being sarcastic, right? It was mainly wanting for us all to have the same sherries that we could taste together, like the actual same brands and everything, which has turned out to be a really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
I like sherry. I can't find any sherry. The
Mm.
stores around me just don't carry it.
Man.
I mean, there's like you get the cream, like the standard like cream
Yeah.
sherry, and you can buy.
Mhm.
There's one brand of PX I see all the time, but finding Amontillado, Fino, etc.
Yeah.
Palo Cortado, I've never seen in a store. It's just such
Huh.
a hard thing.
Do you have any good wine shops around? Because that's usually where I get mine. We've got a place called Beer Run around the corner, and
I need to
Wine
peruse more.
Warehouse.
Total Wine is where I do most of my wine shopping, and they're the ones that I'm blaming for not having
Okay.
the selection. Bob's Liquors, which regrettably went out of business, did have a good wine selection, and that's where I got all of my current bottles of sherry. So,
Well, if you want to do a fortified wine episode, you could throw in some port, Madeira,
yep.
or stick to sherry. I love it all.
Oh, we could do all the fortified wines. I'm a big fan. Actually, before I got into whiskey, my first love in spirits, I guess, was actually port.
Really? That's unusual. I really like playing with port, and will happily have that as my dessert with a good cheese plate, and I'll be in heaven.
Yep, that was me. My wife and I are foodies, and so I would go get a cheese plate. She doesn't really drink, but when we had a cheese plate or something out at a restaurant and they had a nice port on the menu, I would order that. It got to the point where, right, I got to be the snob one time where the waiter brought me out. I had ordered a 30 year because it was like my birthday or something,
Oh.
and the waiter brought back what didn't taste like a 30 year to me. And I said as much, and then he went and checked the system. He was like, "Actually, we ran out of the 30 year, and the bartender poured you something else by accident instead of telling me." So I was like, "Okay,
Wow.
thanks."
Yeah.
So I guess I had a palate for it. And
Yeah.
this was all before I started tasting whiskey, actually. So yeah. And on the note of palates, actually, I had another question, sort of following up. So you've got all these casks, all these different styles, ages, so many different flavors available to you that are all your own distillate, and in some cases, the Scotch that you're using for the VHW, which you're phasing out.
Yep.
So maybe there's like a little sidebar, like, do you have much of the Scotch left, or is that sort of phased out now?
Getting lower and lower. I should be out of it
Yeah.
before the year is out.
All right. So not to tangent too much. So you've got all these different whiskeys available to you that are all your own products that I would imagine taste more similar to each other than whiskeys from different brands taste to each other. I'm coming from the perspective of a whiskey reviewer who's got 200 something bottles at my disposal to taste between, and I'm always surprised at how broad and different they can be from each other. In fact, one of the more recent bottles that really surprised me with how different it was one of the bottles that I have to taste tonight, which was the Single Cask Nation SDR cask.
Yeah.
One of those things where it's just like, yeah, every month something comes by that I didn't know whiskey could taste like that. And so maybe I'm giving the lie to my question by saying, like, how much difference is there between all the different casks that you work with? Or do you get palate blind? And if you do you have to do something to help maintain your ability to taste and craft the blends?
So the first fill bourbon barrels that we get are the most consistent from barrel to barrel. There are, as the years creep past 6 or 7, more differentiation between different casks. But yeah, they're very consistent. The sherry, it can be pretty wildly varied depending on how old it is, where they came from, what they held, and also the type of oak We don't always stick to American white oak. So if it's not Quercus alba, we'll have much more variation. But the craziest for me and one of the most challenging lately has been the cuvee casks. The industry calls them STR. Originally, they were taking the barrels apart and shaving stave by stave. So it was shave, toast, char, and recooper. Nowadays, there's a machine that does the shaving, so they're not taking them apart. So it doesn't really make sense to say STR for recooper. And the R is sometimes called rechar. Wine casks are typically toasted, not charred. So we do cuvee as a nod to the first run of a premium red wine in some countries like Spain. For me, because it could be a different varietal of grape or a different style of wine, a different country, a different cask producer, there is so much variation. So finding consistency there takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And again, we have crazy fluctuations in temperature that can change the way a cask is showing from one week to the next. So I can't even lock it in and think, okay, this is set in stone. It's a living, breathing cask. So there'll be a lot of transformation from some of those, and it could happen very quickly.
So there is a lot of variation such that you're not really worried about not being able to detect the differences from whiskey to whiskey.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and for clarifying about toasting versus charring, charring is what it sounds like, direct on fire for the staves for, depending on the time, the level of char. Toasting is indirect heat, and you can do light, medium heavy, or heavy toast. And a lot of people think that char is about flavor. It's really not. The toasting really can bring out more of the vanillins and wood sugar in a really beautiful way, whereas the charring is more of like a filter being created.
Yeah, I dug into that a little bit recently, and sort of, it's like the barrel has additive effects and subtractive effects.
Absolutely.
Obviously, if the barrel's held anything before, it's going to contribute that flavor to whatever the barrel holds next. And I've got that barrel over there, which I'm hands-on learning that. But then charcoal, it turns out, is a really good thing that sort of neutralizes flavors and chemicals. So there's almost like a war going on in a heavily charred cask between the flavor being added by the barrel and the flavors, hopefully off flavors, being removed from the
Right.
liquid by the char.
Yeah, it would typically be seen as like the undesirable things being filtered out more than like, oh, it's losing the great nuance. That could happen more from things like oxidation versus charring.
All right. I don't know how much you hang out in sort of whiskey enthusiast circles, but there's always this sort of argument that goes on about oxidation in bottles that you've had open for too long. You've got a collection yourself, so you probably are familiar with this problem. I have read what purported to be a scientific blog post. It wasn't a paper. That basically said, no, it's not oxidation because oxidation has happened in its entirety already in the barrel because oxygen is going through all the time. And I say, so I have a bit of a science background, and I say, it's an ever-changing chemical environment in the barrel. There's always the ability for oxygen to react with something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really why you add water to whiskey. If you're adding a drop or two, like if you're a wine drinker, you're going to swirl your wine, open it up. Well, you can swirl whiskey. That higher ABV, it's not going to do you any favors. But adding a drop or two of water, you are opening it up by introducing some oxidation. And yeah, you will absolutely have, depending on the headspace or how well sealed it is, you could lose some nuance. As a general rule, by the time I'm down to like the last fifth of a bottle, I'm going to kill it pretty quickly. I'm going to share it with friends, do something, and it's not going to go bad. It's not going to turn into vinegar. It's just probably going to lose some of the nuances that I like, the more subtle aromas and flavors that I find delicate and beautiful. And I don't want to lose those. So, yeah.
I mostly agree with that. I don't want to test it, I guess, is the thing. Sometimes I wonder if industry people have additional data or information about exactly how long any whiskey, their whiskey lasts once the bottle gets to a certain level. But just in general, I think I think we sort of go, it gets low enough. You should think about rebottling it or finishing it, depending on what it is. That's what I do. I should do it probably sooner. My personal experience, I've never had a whiskey go totally off. or well, maybe I've had one, but like most of the time it just sort of tastes muted after a
Mm-hmm.
while when it's been low. But I have had one whiskey, and I won't name it because I don't like criticizing publicly, where the bottle was so low for so long, and then I went to taste it, and it mostly tasted bitter.
Hmm.
Somehow that bitter flavor from the barrel or whatever had been the overriding flavor. Like all the florals had sort of subsided, and the fruitiness was gone, the
And that's
sweetness
what
was
was
gone. It was
left.
just bitter.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, anybody who's particularly curious could probably go look through my reviews and find the one I'm talking about, where I basically said, yeah, there was a confounding factor here. This was a low bottle.
Mm,
Like, don't take this as my review of the distillery.
fair.
You know, every bottle is its own, you know, its own chance, right?
Mhm.
Actually, here's a great time to say, if you've tried a distillery and you didn't particularly like it, this is a message to the audience. It's worth, you know, seeing if they've changed or they've gotten better or different since then, or they have a different release that you might like if it's been a few years, because distilleries a lot of time are doing experiments, trying different things. You might have had an off bottle. There's any number of reasons. Maybe you didn't like something that you would like it now. Maybe your palate changed. So it's always worth giving a brand a try again. I'll get off my
I've
soapbox
also
now.
I've also encountered bottles that are just off. Like there's always that once in a while chance where you end up with a bottle that, you know, something happened, you know, that particular bottle wasn't washed out right or something, and it
Mm,
tastes off. Like I had a bottle of something from a fairly large producer that tasted kind of soapy, and it was off
mm,
profile. And I ended up, you know, taking that bottle and comparing it against a friend's bottle from probably not the same run, but the same distillery, and they do huge batches. And it really was just totally off profile, soapy, and strange.
mm,
I've had
And
one bottle ever so far that has been noticeably off, and it was off. It was noticeably off before I even poured it and tasted it. Again, I won't say who it was, but I will say that the brand made it right, because they acknowledged that there was definitely something wrong with the bottle. So I had gone to visit a distillery. I came home. I didn't. I've learned you should always open up the box and check the bottle inside if you can before you take it home, because you might notice something's wrong with it. Maybe the label's torn. Maybe the liquid
mm.
is not the right appearance. So I had tried this whiskey in the distillery, really liked it, bought a bottle to take home, kept it in the box, put it on my floor, you know, good old floor whiskey, which is a perfectly fine thing to do, right? It's just I didn't find a place for it in my cabinet yet. 2 months later or something like that, I opened up the box, took out the bottle, and went to pour it. And before I poured it, I noticed there was this haze in the bottom, and it wasn't just like a haze um, you know, even this one doesn't have it, but like you get that sort of like that sort of sugary looking haze sometimes that it sort of
Or
goes
when it's
away when you
not
swirl
chill
the bottle.
filtered, a little cloudy.
Exactly,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
like that's a sign of quality as far as I'm
yeah.
concerned. But this whiskey had fluffy things in the bottom. And
Mm,
after I had, and I was like, that's funny. Like that could just be barrel sediment. I don't know, right? So I pour a glass, and then like it's all sort of like mixed up, and I can see these things floating around. It's just like this sort of some sort of
yeah, I think I
growth
know what
of
that
something.
was.
Yeah.
Do you know what the ABV of that was? Do you remember?
Here, I'll try not to show it on stream because I
Okay.
have the box next to me.
My
I'm
guess
gonna
is it's
say,
46% or under.
yeah, I was gonna say 45, but it actually is 46.
Okay. So at 46.3 and higher, you're usually safe from this. But if it's not chill filtered, long chain fatty acids can drop out of solution. If you shake it up really well, it should dissolve back into solution if it's what I think it is. That's my theory of what you were seeing there, but I could be wrong. And
So
even if they use like a 5 micron filter, it could still come through because it would be in solution
I'm
until it's chilled.
pretty sure that this wasn't that this
Okay.
wasn't that sort of artifact of just it wasn't chill filtered. I I don't I wouldn't be surprised if this is chill filtered, but it is a column still whiskey, which is interesting. It's a
Oh,
column still
okay. Then
American
yeah,
single
if it
malt,
was,
which
yeah.
narrows it down quite a lot, probably, which it is because there's not a whole lot of those. I can't just, you know, this is such a fascinating thing. The brand made it right. And I kind of want to talk about it because I can talk about them favorably in that sense, right? Like everybody has an off bottle now and then. But I don't want to like damage a
Right.
brand's reputation or my relationship with them. So like I haven't figured out how I carefully will approach this yet. Anyway, I poured this whiskey and I was like, yeah, no, okay, maybe that's just the haze because it wasn't chill filtered or something like that. I'll try it anyway. It didn't taste right. It tasted
Oh,
hollow. It tasted bitter. I poured Wild Turkey 81 next to it and it was weaker than that. So, and then I contacted the brand and I, was like, hey, so, this doesn't taste like what I tasted at the distillery. It looks funny. I didn't, mistreat it at all. I just carried it home and then put it on, 70-degree room, kept it there the whole time. Right. So yeah, they refunded me. They weren't able to send me another bottle, but I was able to get another bottle, using the refund. So in that
okay.
sense, like they made it right. So,
Yeah.
and that one does taste the way I expected it to taste. So like clearly there was something wrong. Point is, it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a real long tangent about
Yeah.
off bottles. Sorry. We should try to find our train of thought.
Well, let's go back to talking about the batting room because I have probably a really weird technical question.
Okay.
When you are moving vat contents from one vat to the next, do you use pumps or siphon?
Oh, pumps. And there are actual pipes that connect. So literally, we just have to turn a lever to open and then another lever to open, and it flows right through. And then we can shut it off, shut it off. It's so easy.
The reason why I ask is because I've seen some really interesting systems where they have variable heights
Yep.
and basically rely on
Gravity or.
basically using line drop to siphon without using pumps. And I was just curious.
Yeah, we do use pumps for a lot of things, including disgorging the casks into the first tank. And then we have pneumatic pumps. We also circulate our water when we're doing the reductions. So we have different steps along the way in there.
I haven't thought about that particular technical aspect too much.
It's
I'm
just
betting that doesn't warrant a chapter in the book.
maybe not.
Distillery equipment could be a fun thing. I'm not sure how many people want to see really well shot pictures of distillery equipment, though.
Some
That
of
could
us
be a
are really-
hilarious coffee table book, though, right?
Right.
If we just lean into not taking ourselves too seriously.
I mean,
Okay,
there
so
is-
sorry, go ahead.
there is something remarkably beautiful, in my personal opinion, about stills and the routing of pipes around vats and just the whole distillery system is to
Mhm.
me really beautiful.
Yeah.
And perhaps it's because like I grew up being fascinated with mechanical things like steam
Mhm.
locomotives and the like, where like mechanical and like shaped metal and tracing pipes from one place to another is just a really cool thing to me. And being able to like almost follow in audiovisual terms a signal path where
Yeah.
you can trace where everything is going is just really cool. And I would say that there's lots of room on the market for a very large coffee table book that's just maybe a mix of black and white and color photography of stills and vats from weird angles.
I agree. We were really lucky because we had an engineer from, he'd had 45, 50 years of experience in the industry before he came to Virginia. Harry Coburn, he was the engineer at Bowmore on Isla and had helped start, I think, 15, 16 distilleries around the world after he moved on from there. And he set up everything very linearly. So you can follow from the silos holding the barley into the milling room, from there, the mash tun, from there, the fermentation tanks, from there, the stills and the spirit safe, from there, our spirit vat, And then you have the lower level with all the other beautiful things, the pipes, and our low wines and tanks receiver. And I love it. And then from there, it goes very naturally into the barreling hall. So it's a perfect flow. It's great for kind of walking through and feeling like I understand. I can see every step along the way.
I think I heard there was a new Scotch distillery opening that is built vertically so that they only have to pump one time up to the top, and then every step is downstream,
I'm
literally
fascinated.
down underneath. I don't remember which one that was. That's all the information I have.
I'm
But
blanking now, but I'm trying to get over. I haven't been to the Port of Leith distillery yet, so that's one of the newer ones I want to check out, and it's right there by the Britannia. And yeah, all these new distilleries in Scotland are stunning.
okay, I thought of a question that kind of came up while we were thinking about. So if we could push it back from barrels just a little bit and talk a little bit about distillation style.
Mm.
Well, I guess I should ask just to cover my bases. Does Virginia Distilling Co. Uh, do anything particularly remarkable as far as grain sourcing or distillation yeast, anything like that that happens before the barreling?
Yeah. One interesting thing is we stick to two-row spring barley right now. Down the road, we'll probably do winter barley too. The idea of two-row is the quality of it versus the quantity that would be available. And we work with a lot of local farmers. We've grown a little bit in Virginia, and then we work through the North Midwest into the southern part of Canada now to get our barley. And the yeast is really cool. We use two different strains. One is, and they're proprietary, but one is there to be the workhorse to do the conversion for us. And the other one is there because we really like the esters that it generates during the 72-hour ferment.
Nice. So 70, I feel weird saying this now, but 72 hours is on a relatively short ferment
Yeah.
in the craft American single
Right?
malt world. Everybody's talking about their 6 and 7 and sometimes 10-day fermentations.
We played around with a bit more, but yeah, we usually do 72.
And in absolute terms, that is by no means a short fermentation. You could do a lot more rapid than that if you were doing turbo yeast or distillers
Right.
yeast. Okay, so the question that I was going to ask about, so you've got all these different barrel types, and theoretically a range of ages that you're targeting for various barrel types, whether it's finishing or full maturation in the different types of wines, all these sorts of options that you have. So I was going to ask, Daniel Whittington kind of gave me this question. Do you target your distillation styles to the specific types of barrels that you'll be using?
Yeah, absolutely. We are looking for a very consistent distillate. It offers orchard fruit, so you're going to get some green pear, green apple, a little bit of the banana nut bread notes, and some pineapple, maybe a little bit of the tropical coming through, but very straightforward nectarine, peach, and those notes I don't want to cover ever. The idea there is complement it, and if you look for it, you should be able to find that orchard fruit somewhere in there. But all the depth and character, I'm relying on the casks for. So.
Okay. So is there any variation from distillation run to distillation run? Say you're filling ex-bourbon or you're filling Oloroso sherry. Do you change the distillation style or the cuts or the proof that you enter the barrels with? Anything like that?
Not at all.
Okay.
It all goes into our bulk spirit receiver or spirit vat. We've got two of them, and we bring it down to the legal entry proof for whiskey, 62.5. We've experimented with lower than that in the past. But yeah, exact same new make goes into all the casks, and I rely on the barrels and casks to give me variance.
Awesome. We have a question actually, we have several questions came in on the chat. First, I'm going to add a little bit to this question. So,
Okay.
Amanda, if you were going to relax for an evening with one pour of whiskey, say if it was going to be one of your own, which would it be? And if it was going to be something other than one of your own, which would it be?
Well, it's usually if it's one of my own, what I've been working on, which is weird, but I do take my work home with me and I enjoy it that much. So lately, probably the sherry cask or the double cask reserve if it's my own. And I love trying single malts from around the world and other American single malts. So I'm always enjoying experimenting and finding something new. So I don't get stuck in a rut ever. But I would say if it wasn't a single malt whiskey, lately I've been having, well, I'm a tea fanatic. So I make a pot
Okay.
of tea almost every night, and it will occasionally turn into a hot toddy with a port cask finished whiskey or something a little bit more smoky and peated from Scotland. So,
Okay. That sounds
yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. We talk a lot more about coffee than tea on this podcast, but
Oh,
I sort of I like not to speak with any authority on tea at all because my wife is from China, from the tea producing region, and
yeah.
she and her family know way more than I do. So I feel I would just be speaking out of turn if I talked about tea. But we are
I want to meet
definitely
your
tea
wife
fans
and
here.
we can geek out on tea.
Sounds good. I'm sure I could set that up. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, I'll talk to her about it. I think she's a little bit hesitant to have her face out on the internet
Oh.
for various reasons
Well,
because of
bring
her
her for a
professional
visit and we'll
identity.
just go out for tea after.
That makes a lot more sense. Not doing it on stream.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's what we should do. Um, okay. Rich also asked, is there a ice wine cask anywhere in your warehouse?
No, there's not. I've played around with somebody else's ice wine cask, but to date, not on site in Virginia. But you never know.
Oh yeah. Are you okay with promoting a different whiskey
Of
brand
course.
on the stream? So Rich recommends the Celtic whiskey from. You'll have to remind me what the brand of that is, but this is the North Dakotan Highland something American single malt.
Okay.
They also have the. I need to go look that up. Actually,
Yeah. Very cool.
nope. Celtic whiskey is all that's Stonehouse.
Okay.
Stonehouse.
I have not tried it yet. Thank you for the rec.
Oh, Montana. Yeah, I can. Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. I
Probably not
remember the
available in
label now.
Virginia, but I will see who I know over in Montana that can snag me a bottle.
I can definitely plus one that recommendation because that was one of the more different whiskeys that I had. And my first impression of it, that was the most recent thing that made me think I didn't know whiskey could taste like that.
Very cool. I'm intrigued.
Uh, and I had this impression it did remind me of something in my collection already, but I hunted around and couldn't find anything that was even close. It did
Oh,
something interesting, like a buttered popcorn kind of note, the way that like an Octomore in a French wine cask has
yeah.
that sort of butter popcorn note, but it wasn't particularly peaty. So it
Hmm.
was kind of a strange and unusual. Uh, I can send a link afterwards, Rich. If you want to send me the link on Discord, I can send that to Amanda. I think you might get auto moderated if you post links in YouTube chat. Possibly, you could
Yeah,
try.
typically.
Probably probably not the best idea. But yeah, send me a link on the side, and I'll make sure that she gets it. I can add that now that we've talked for like 2 minutes on air. I can put it in the show notes also, I guess, but we'll see. Um, anyway, so I was gonna joke. So your approach to choosing a whiskey for the evening is roll a D% and check your inventory.
That is accurate for sure.
I
That's
can no
exactly
longer
what I
think
do.
that.
Yep. Yeah. I like to pair depending on what I'm eating and also what movie I'm going to watch or book I'm going to read. I love making it an experience. So if I'm watching Casablanca or The Third Man, then I've got a very strong idea in my head of what I want. And if I'm feeling more like Princess Bride, it's going to be something totally different. So you never know, but it has to
I
fit.
keep I keep thinking about doing a classical music and whiskey pairing review series. But that's such a so I'm also a violinist and violist,
Oh,
which
I
is
love
that's not
that.
my day job either. That's just my other hobby. Uh,
Very cool.
so I keep thinking, oh yeah, I should probably put some of that knowledge to the test and see if I could combine that into something interesting. So if
Yeah.
you have any recommendations for good classical music and whiskey pairings, I'll take them.
Well, it's funny because when I'm doing my grading of the single barrels, I think about them in terms of creating like an orchestral piece. And so I've got my bass notes I'm looking for, and I love the strings. They're usually my favorite, so I'm kind of gravitating towards for all of the middle part. And yeah, I think that music and whiskey makes so much sense.
I want to dig in so much on that. I would love to geek out on whiskey music stuff. So besides strings, what kind of timbre contributes like the woodwinds from your
Yeah.
flavor
Well, it's
toolbox?
funny because I'm setting the base notes with usually the first fill bourbon. I'm looking for something very foundational and consistent. And then the more playful, well, even like we sometimes find like a crazy sherry and we'll call that our piccolo. But it really depends on which product I'm going for. And it varies cast type based on what whiskey it is that I'm creating. So it will always vary, other than for me, usually first fill bourbon is my groundwork.
Okay, so first fill bourbon on the ground floor, sherry
Yeah.
for the high notes. So who's filling out the mids?
Well, right now, if we're talking the signature malt, those two blue tins right there by Phil, then typically it's a sherry. I'm getting all that complexity with the Fino, Olo, and PX because Oloroso is going to be more nutty and a little more of that burnt caramel sugar that I like. The Fino is going to be more bright and tropical and floral. And then the PX is the leather, fig, plum, chocolate, all of that. So they bring in a lot of complexity right there.
Nice. I love thinking about tasting profiles like music. I
Yeah,
spent probably 20 minutes of my hour with Daniel Whittington just talking about how whiskey is music.
it is. It's
I need to go
experiential.
publish that video.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating how many distillers, blenders, and whiskey enthusiasts are musicians,
Mm,
or also music enthusiasts.
yeah.
Like Jason Parker does a bluegrass night at a my brain just went blank.
The new Kenmore location, he's got a bluegrass jam.
I was trying to think of which place it was and wasn't thinking of where they were. And you know, Joe Sullivan is a guitarist
I love
and
Joe.
has
Yeah.
joked about putting together a band of distillers, which I would definitely buy an album or two.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating how many spirits
Yeah.
out
There
And
there.
then
are common
so many
threads.
opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of fascinating, right? Like, is it just a coincidence, or is there something that draws these types of musical
Yeah.
people, these sorts of artistic creatives to the making of whiskey? And
Yeah.
I think it's not a coincidence. That's my theory.
I support that. Well, I think whiskey's meant to be enjoyed and experienced in a way that people who love music kind of already have that in their blood, that sort of slow down, really be in the moment and feel everything.
Yep. So yeah, we've gone over an hour, and we haven't talked about any of the specific things that we actually have for drinking today. Um, if you don't mind, we could maybe do some sort of tasting through what we have. And I think the sort of best that I can think is to go in more or less chronological order for my samples.
Yeah.
So I've sort of started with, and this is funny enough. I'm suggesting that we taste through in exactly the opposite order from the order that I received these, or the order that I first tasted them. So I have the first batch of the Courage and Conviction, the Nancy Fraley batch. I believe that's the first batch. Did I get that right?
Well, the first was George Moore, and then Nancy
Oh,
Fraley was their second bottling of it. So very
okay.
close. Yeah.
Very
Same
close.
here.
So an early one at any rate.
Yeah.
Uh,
This is a little
do you still have
larger.
this one, Phil?
Yes,
This is actually my first taste of this one. I poured this at the beginning of the hour. It sort of, there's something about it that feels smoky.
Mm,
And I don't think I would say that's peat. It's something else.
yeah.
And the best I could think is based on my experience with the other two bottles that I have, that it probably is coming from the cuvee casks.
Hmm. Yeah. The idea here is delicate, nuanced, complex. So relying on the three core casks we've been talking about, the first fill bourbon, the sherry, and the cuvee, I get more of the smoky note from a specific sherry source that we've been getting. And so you're close
Okay.
with the wine. Um, Although the toasting charring process does bring out some really nice wood sugars that I think can enhance the smoky note in a way, with that contrast of the sweet and the fruit. I get a lot of apricot, blood orange, milk chocolate, red fruit kind of hanging out softly with the smoke in the background on the signature malt. And it's one of those that it will open up for hours. If you add a drop or two of water, more butterscotch and vanilla will start to come through. And it's just very approachable, but still layered.
That happens to be my favorite way to enjoy a whiskey. I have a tendency of pouring a half ounce and then drinking it over the period of about an hour or two, sometimes longer. I actually
Yeah.
poured a little bit of this one last night, and then I was reading a book, and I just put a cap on it when I was ready to go to sleep, and didn't even finish my half ounce.
I walk around with even an empty glass, still smelling it for hours. The
I
team at work is
used
used to it.
I love
Yeah.
that. I used to put that in my reviews. I used to call that the afternoose, and I put that in my reviews because for me that's a big part of the experience. And
Yeah.
I think I
In,
stopped doing it because it's hard to be consistent with doing it.
well, in brandy, we call it the fondue vert, the aroma that rises out of the glass. So yeah, you're spot on.
I have a technique I thought up to do that, and I actually haven't really brought it into practice yet. My idea was I have way too many glasses, right? Like just well, you can't see them all, but there's like a dozen glasses over there from earlier tastings in the week that I haven't cleaned yet. I have plenty of glasses, so what I can do is just like pour some whiskey in a glass and then sort of Richard Patterson it into a different glass instead of onto the floor, and then I could smell the empty glass and be able to actually take my notes from the tasting in the full glass, and I don't have to wait the extra 2 hours or come back to it later or deal with
Okay.
any of those inconsistency problems.
Got your technique.
Anybody who needed a technique for that, you're welcome.
This is going to sound really strangely snobby. I get a flavor on here that's like the really nice vanilla extract. Like
Hmm.
not the like McCormick by the like big bottle, but like the like nice like when you buy it from the
Madagascar
store.
vanilla.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's got the bean in it, and I
Yeah.
get some of that.
Some of those first fill bourbons can still have the vanilla, but yeah, if you look through, I mean, it's going to come out of the wood. Yeah, vanilla.
This is lovely. This is going to be one of those situations where I regret only having 2 ounces of it.
Oh.
Rich wanted to clarify, did you say peated sherry? I believe that was PX sherry
Yeah,
or something
so
else.
I was saying that the smoky note can sometimes be found in some of those sherry casks, but they're not peated. It's just a more like dry, smoky, soft. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess on that note, do you work with a specific sherry producer or multiple? Or do
Multiple,
you,
but
yeah, I guess the
um,
other half is, do you work with a specific sort of barrel broker that gets the barrels for you, or is it a more direct relationship?
mostly direct right now. The first big relationship we got from Jim Swan was Jose Miguel Martin in Spain, and we were really lucky to have that because a lot of those casks we were getting really had been on Solaris for decades to centuries, and now the world is moving more and more towards people aren't drinking sherry; they're not drinking port very much, and it hurts. So seasoned sherry casks are really more and more prevalent, and we're not there yet, but I think it's probably just going to be a matter of time before I kind of switch into maybe shorter aged, 3 to 5 years on the Solera. You know, it's going to happen.
Yeah, that's a shame.
I know. It hurts.
I kind of didn't realize that was happening with port. It seems like that's the favored dessert wine at the moment.
Yeah, I feel like Tawny Ports and Ruby are still going to be safer for a while. But we're kind of keeping an eye on it.
Fair enough. Shall we move on to the double cask reserve? Or feel free to interject with any other release that you want to talk about, Phil.
I mean, that's a logical um, step forward, I think.
Yeah,
Okay.
Double
So,
Kiss Reserve is new for us. We bought it in September of last year. It got a lot of notice really quickly, which was fun. Maxim Spirit of the Week, like the week after it came out. But the idea is a little older, a little higher ABV. We're jumping up to 48% ABV, and it's a ratio of about 55% aged in the first fill bourbon, 45 in the cuvee red wine, and it's a lot of gingerbread and butterscotch, and the red berries are hanging out in the back with the chocolate and ginger and little cardamom. It's a good, like, I was drinking a lot over Christmas, and it was so good with food.
Yeah, I had to take this bottle upstairs at Christmas because I didn't want it to be completely consumed.
Save the whiskey.
here's a bit of a fun aside, maybe. There's been a bit of a trend to move away from uh, tubes and so on because of environmental stuff. Now these are
Right.
nice metal tins, so like far from the worst for the environment probably.
Right.
But I was just sort of double checking here. Your bottle does not have all of the same information as the tube does, right?
No.
It's all of the important information, surely, but the tube does include such things as tasting notes, whereas the bottle
Yeah.
doesn't.
Correct.
So that tells me that you very much intend for the tube to be part of the presentation of your whiskey, and that you
Yeah.
probably don't have a tubeless option or anything like that.
Not for these core ones. We don't use any secondary packaging for the VDC line. It's very deliberate. The approach here is kind of like, as a book lover, I'm thinking about the cover, and it does matter, and we want to tell the story, and we have a really good way of sourcing right now to create these. So I'll never say never to getting rid of them, but I think that they do tell the story in a really cool way.
Yeah,
And I get no credit for
shared
that.
this.
Packaging is marketing, not me.
Fair enough. I shared this bottle with a friend the day that I opened it, and I sort of didn't initially, like, he saw the tube because, I was unpackaging it and all that, but I sort of, I went to pour the glasses and then I left the tube on the table. And then I sort of went like, oh, the tube has, like, I went back to get the tube and bring it over because, like, the tube, and I put it on the table there with the glasses because seeing all of this together is the presentation. It's part of the enjoyment, right? You taste with your eyes as much as anything.
Yeah.
And let's just talk about a couple, like, as long as we're talking about packaging, let's talk about a couple other details of the packaging. So first of all, I don't know if anybody else has a bottle of this handy, but I noticed this is a magnet,
Yeah.
which I sort of discovered by accident, but that's awesome. And I saw in an interview that you gave with a liquor store in Texas that there were ribbons tucked in underneath that magnet as part of the presentation.
Yeah. We only did that for select single barrel picks for accounts. Thank goodness. The bottling
And it
team
just
has their
fits.
work out.
Yeah, that seems like, I was gonna ask, like, that seems like a very manual thing to do, and the magnet lets you do that without extra glue or anything, but that just seems like a fiddly thing to add.
Yeah. Well, they had on the ribbon like the information from the account, so it was like really tailored to each individual selection. Yeah.
And there's another nice detail that I don't think I would have noticed, but the stopper is quite heavy.
Yeah.
Seems to be metal, or at least
It is.
a layer of metal. And what somebody told me, I haven't tried this yet, is that you could take an ice cube
Yeah.
and use this metal as a conductive way to put a brand on the ice cube.
True. Yeah.
So
and
that's
the
a
ball
very cool bit.
marker is for golfing too. The magnet that
Is a
comes off
ball
the-
marker.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
So if people are into golfing, I am not, but many people in our company are.
So listen, when you buy a Virginia Distilling Company bottle, you are getting whiskey and beautiful packaging and an accessory and a half. or maybe 3 accessories, depending on how you count.
So the true story is our marketing team is as geeky as our production team in their own way.
And I hate to say that I spent way more time talking about the packaging of this than what it tasted like, because it's delicious, but it's impossible to ignore this packaging. This is one where I think if you didn't have the bottle in front of you, if a friend had just shared a sample with you, you would certainly be missing out. So there's my endorsement for go get a bottle.
Love it.
Sorry, I got distracted sticking the magnet to various things around me.
Yep. I promise it's a magnet, in case that's what you were testing.
No, if you hand me anything, I'll just fiddle with it. So.
Yep. It's the thing to do with magnets. You get a magnet, you stick it to things.
Yeah. You go around going, "Ooh, will a magnet stick to this?" No. Okay.
See, I grew up in the 90s and learned never to put a magnet near a computer. So since I'm here sitting in front of a computer, my impulse is don't mess with the magnet. Even though that's basically totally fine these days because nothing is actually magnetic. Don't take my word on that. You could have an old laptop that still has a hard drive. I don't know. But most of the time, you're not getting magnetic sensitive stuff anymore. Anyway, I have... Sadly, Phil, I don't think you have a sample of this.
No.
But I have a Single Cask Nation 5-year STR cask that came out in September. And this was what I was saying. Back when I tasted this in December, this was something that made me go, wow, I didn't know whiskey could taste like that.
Oh,
Which is, I've said that a lot in this conversation. It's been a monthly occurrence, or maybe even more often than that I come across something that makes me go, wow, I didn't know.
Yeah. Jason Johnston Yellen is my neighbor. He lives in Bridgewater, Virginia. And so he has a standing invitation. He'll come and hang out with me at the distillery. He has drilled into casks. We were his first time with the power drill and a barrel. I have it filmed. And yeah, he is just a great friend. And I know Josh a little bit. He seems wonderful too. And I haven't met Jess yet. But yeah, it's been really fun each year to do a pick with them. And that was a fun one for sure. So that tie to Virginia was already right there. And I love that they are strong educators and they really have a great community and do a lot of good. So I'm all about them.
And this does somewhat explain how you've been on their podcast 3 or 4 times already. You are definitely a favorite of theirs. And I was going to say, I'm very pleased that you've given this interview to us. I think that I've been a little bit under a rock as far as it comes to podcasts and interviews of industry people, because the way that I end up looking, I end up not finding a lot of things for a lot of people. My impression was you haven't given a whole lot of interviews, but you have been on Single Cask or One Nation Under Whiskey 3 or 4 times, I believe. Something like that.
Yeah. I'm an introvert and I love talking about whiskey. But yeah, I'm usually talking to barrels and they don't talk back to me. So yeah, usually if I get the opportunity, I'll just write out my answers for a book or something and send them via email. I do enjoy these. I think it's fun, but yeah, usually I am more reticent.
Well, I'm just going to show off this whiskey a little bit. First of all, look at how beautifully dark that is. And I know that, no color added and is sort of the way that I like my things. But I know that color is not the whole story, but it's hard to ignore when you've got something that's that sort of lovely. It's not just a shade of amber. It's got a reddish hue to it, which makes sense because this is a red wine cask that has been, it says, this one specifically says STR. And this was the first bottle of VA Distillery Company that I'd ever gotten. So I was like, oh, literally before I looked up anything about the distillery, I just wanted to buy this from Single Cask Nation because they sold it so well on their podcast, right?
Nice.
So I was like, oh, STR cask. Well, I know what that means. That means shaved toasted something, right? And that probably means it was a wine cask before.
Mhm.
And that was sort of as far as I'd gone with that. And then I took the American Single Malt Academy course and learned that they are in fact red wine casks that you usually call cuvee, in this case STR. So I guess my question about this is there a significance to the fact that it was labeled STR as opposed to the cuvee?
Yeah, well, I was talking to Jason and said, we're not going to use that term, but this is what the industry calls it, and it is all yours. And he said, yeah. He understood the background with Dr. Jim Swan and the creation of the STR cask, and I think that was really foundational in that choice too. So, knowing the origin story, where it came from, all of that really led to this makes sense. And it's a full circle moment for a lot of people who were following the rise of American single malt and other world single malts in kind of contrast to Scotch.
And so I guess for the benefit of the audience and for Phil, who doesn't have this, but maybe I can tempt him with it. So this, if it tastes like wine, it tastes like a very dry wine to me. It has a deep woodiness to it that isn't bitter, but it isn't like oak the way that you think of bourbon as oaky either. And it's heavy on chocolate, and there's a fermented fruit quality to it that's like really hard to describe. It's almost like those sort of chocolate cherry cordial things that are filled with the syrup were made with like actual cherry liqueur, like a really good high quality one, but also like with all most I would say most of the sweetness sort of taken out of it. Like this is one of those things that smells like sweet things but doesn't taste sweet and doesn't even really smell particularly sweet. Like it's like dark chocolate. It's like dry wine. It's that sort of thing. And all of that adds up to something that is just very unlike most whiskey that I've ever tasted.
Mm.
So I could recommend this experience at the very least, and it is quite delicious. Yeah, I haven't met a an expression from Virginia Distillery Company that I haven't liked yet. So that's it's always a good thing.
It's a challenge to make a lot of different products that appeal to different palates and yet have that consistency where I think people will enjoy everything. So I have to keep in mind, like, not everybody's going to love every release, but maybe they'll like every release and then have their favorites. And that is what I'm going for because I know some people have, certain things they're looking for. And I try to keep that in mind while being true to myself and to the distillate and our maturation environment.
I'm putting that away now because it will distract me. It's one of those.
So, back onto the random tangents. Have you ever considered doing like a barrel sharing sort of program with other distilleries, breweries, wineries in the Commonwealth?
Yeah. So we have been trading barrels back and forth with several local cideries. We've got two in Richmond, Virginia. Busky has been really fun to work with. Potter Cider here in Charlottesville. We also work with Laird's Apple Brandy, which is fun. But the beer has been really fun this year. And actually, Caitlin gets a sneak peek of it on Monday if she's still on. But I gave a bunch of barrels to Hardywood in Richmond, Virginia. They do a gingerbread stout. And they gave the barrels back when they were done. And I moved 6-year whiskey in and have been finishing for a while now. And so that is something really fun. And we're going to keep that trade going back and forth. They have their second round of barrels from us already. And I've done that with a few other breweries and a couple wineries too. So I love that. And I am not opposed to doing some barrel trading with other distilleries. We've had a couple small collaborations already, and I've loved them very much.
The reason why I ask is because I've read in a few places that lots of distilleries end up going through a barrel broker who's sort of gathering barrels from all over the country. And so a lot of places aren't really having the opportunity to, or have not chosen to take the opportunity to do a lot of local collaboration and sort of a joke that I made recently is a rising tide lifts all casks, and if you are sharing that with the folks around you, you can share, say, oh hey, if you like this, you should try these local producers of various other products.
Yeah. Well, you just touched on a big part of my job that I never talk about. It's relationship management. I, every single week, am sending emails and having calls with people in France, Spain, Portugal, and here in the US, in California. There are relationships that are easy that I literally just say, hey, I got 2 bottles set aside for you of whatever project we've collaborated on. And they're just ready to keep it going every year. And other times when it's like they didn't plan to do anything with barrels this year, or so it's very challenging. And barrels are getting more and more expensive. Casks from different countries are getting more and more expensive. So it is something that I put a lot of energy into, for sure.
And I'm sure that doing like collaborations where you are sharing casks around sort of spreads the cost a little bit more.
Yeah, we'll have it so all they have to do is handle pickup or delivery of the casks, and it's the only thing that they have to worry about. We do a lot of really cool things that are beneficial to our partners, and these are some relationships that we've had now going on 8 years. So we're a relatively young company. We've been distilling and aging since 2015, and some of those first relationships, like the cider and some of the local port style wineries, King Family, Veritas, we've been working with them from the get go.
I have a question, which maybe leads into Rich's question. So you deal with ex-bourbon and various wines and ciders and beers and all these other options, but I don't think I've heard you mention ex-American single malt casks. Do you age your whiskey in your own previously filled whiskey casks?
No, we only do first fill for our own products. However, I do use second fill for other products that I make for other countries. So we export to South Korea, and we will use some of those casks specifically for a softer, more neutral product that they like. So they're looking for something more sessionable and approachable in that way. It doesn't fit our profile, but again, I love being green with the casks and finding new uses for them. So I do have a handful of second fill, but not for any of our products.
Okay. So if not your own, would you be open to reciprocal aging barrel trading with another whiskey distillery, perhaps single malt distilleries?
Potentially, yeah. I'm always open to conversations and seeing how profiles will work and what we can plan. So, yeah.
Anything is possible. So here's Rich's question. Would you be open to doing an Irish whiskey collaboration?
Yeah. So our owner, George Moore and Angela Moore's mom, they are good friends with the Teeling family. So Jack and John, we've gotten a lot of inspiration and things from them. And we did do a single barrel release of an Irish whiskey a couple of years ago. So we did one called Hibernia. It was really fun. And we did one called Britannia. That was the English one. And Caledonia from Scotland.
Okay, so I think we've been live for an hour and a half. I think it's probably about time that we start wrapping up. So just a few more questions, I think, before we move on or before we close out for the night. And if chat wants to drop any questions, that would be great. So I have a question. You work very closely with the barrels. You learn their personalities. Do you ever have to make a difficult decision of, say, blending away a barrel that you particularly love, or anything along those lines?
Yes. There are some barrels that, I mean, they're really distinctive. And I remember a couple feeling heartbroken that I wasn't going to get to have the entire barrel for myself and my friends. Yeah, there are always those moments of weighing. Is this a component that I need to sacrifice? It would be a beautiful single cask, but I think it's going to be necessary to contribute to the depth and complexity or bring in this distinct note that I'm looking for in a blend, or, vice versa. It's always a trade-off, depending on the cask type and how I'm feeling about it showing. We have a motto: we let the whiskey tell us when it's ready, and that helps me feel like I'm finding the right home for it. And it's really rewarding. Sometimes I'll have a message from a sales team member, and they'll be saying like, "I'm going to this event. I'm looking for this. We can sell a whole barrel with it. This is crazy, but this is what I'm looking for." And I love it. It's almost like a treasure hunt where I already know in the back of my mind these casks will work. And it's really satisfying to have that member of our sales team say, "Oh my God, this is exactly it." And finding out that the people who are buying it are in love with it too. So yeah, they're all like my little children, and I need to find the perfect home for them.
So that list of honey barrels that you maintain,
Yeah.
have you ever taken a barrel and disgorged it, I guess was the word that you used before, early before it has a buyer, before it's ready to be used in a blend because it is absolutely done aging?
I have, yes. In part of my ranking system, I have it is fully mature and I don't want it to get over oaked. So yeah, a handful of times. And every year I pick a barrel to be our team cask and I dedicate it to our employees. And I have a lot of fun with that, doing something crazy or unique every year and kind of showing them something fun. And they usually call me with their thoughts or like at a party, like, "Hey, I just opened it." And they have to share their thoughts. And it's my favorite thing.
On that note, how much input do you take from the rest of your team on which barrels and how to use them?
Well, we keep it pretty small with our sensory panel. So I have Dustin Castor, he's our distillery director, Brian Hersey, who is our cellar and warehouse manager, and our newest member is John Price. He is one of our distillers, and they have very different palates. So I love getting the data points from them. But I just had the entire team on site for our all hands kickoff in January, and I let them try a lot of new things, and I love that feedback. Usually they're confirming what I already felt and believed in. But there was one time when our chief marketing officer wanted actually what is now double cask reserve to be a 40% ABV, 80 proof product. And he wanted it to be very different. And I did not want it. And I relied on the whole sales team to back me up in a blind sort of, "What are your thoughts? Here's 1 and 2." And it was unanimous. And I was like justified. So I it's always one of those things where I want to give the team what they're looking for and what I think people will really enjoy. But I think that the really cool thing is we're always going to have this respect for what the whiskey is doing, and I get to help find its perfect forever home.
Nice. It's a wonderful way to think about it. The
Yeah.
barrels are pets,
Right?
ready for adoption.
Yep.
That somehow reminded me. I had a question earlier about the ABV. So you did mention that you went from a 46% standard release to the double cask reserve, at least, as a 48%. Both are safe to not chill filter.
Yeah.
In
Maybe
theory.
not chill filter.
So was there any, I think 46 is sort of walking close to the line. Was there any particular reason related to that worry of haze in the whiskey to increase the proof? Or was there some other decision besides make it not 40%, make it 48%? Was there some other decision driving the slight increase in the product proof?
I always want to go up. We have some even higher ABVs on the very near horizon. I love making the whiskey approachable. So you should never be smacked in the face by the alcohol. I can do that. I'm not worried about that. I think it's very tempting to have lower ABV because the more water you add, the more whiskey you suddenly have to bottle and more you can sell. But I want people to experience whiskey in a rich, decadent way. And if they want to have it on the rocks or add some water and open it up, they should be able to do that safely. And I want to know that the whiskey is still going to show very well. And that's really important to me. So that was very, very crucial. And yeah, we do have to deal with some issues. There, it is a little bit more of a loss for us to bottle at a higher strength, but it's worth it, in my opinion, with quality.
My read on the market is that you usually can charge a bit more for more than proportionally for a higher alcohol percentage. But that's
Yeah.
just my perspective as a consumer. Does that
Most
bear
people
out at
think that.
all?
Yeah. Yeah. I think people are, well, whiskey consumers are more educated now and they know and understand what they're getting and they can read a label really well. And that wasn't always the case. So, yeah.
It is really fascinating to listen to consumers in other countries talk about how disappointed they are when they get American whiskey releases bottled at 40%, and sometimes, Scotch or an Irish whiskey bottled at 40%, and then they see, people in the U.S. posting their, you know, 43%, 46%, and going, why can't we have that?
Mm, yeah.
My
And
whenever I see a question like that, oh, Europe gets the 40% version of that bourbon, I go, yeah, they were trying to save money
Yeah. Well, and their
or make more
palates might
money,
be a
I guess.
little different too. I
yeah,
think the US palate likes a little bit more ABV.
That may be true. Yeah, bourbon tends to be punchier, so maybe they're aiming for a flavor saturation that is more in
Yeah.
line with the
The spice of
46% single
rye.
malt
Yeah.
and kind of needing to bring it down a little bit more. Maybe that's the idea. But on the other hand, if any marketing people happen to be listening to this at some point in the future, um, I have a lot of European acquaintances who are disappointed with the 40% releases because they actually do feel like they're missing out on the tasting experience that the
Yeah.
Americans do get to have, and they are plenty capable of drinking 46% alcohol. So, okay, here's a fun question that could be a geeky rabbit hole from Rich. Does U.S. tax by ABV?
Oh,
And
they
I'm going
used
to
to.
open this up by saying it depends what phase in the process that you're asking about, because as far as distillation goes, they tax by the proof gallon, which means the equivalent of a gallon at 100 proof. And beyond that, I don't really know, but anecdotally, I can tell you in Washington state, they charge a liquor tax by the liter. So, one reason I got into drinking cask strength whiskey is actually because it's more cost effective for me to buy higher alcohol proof percentage whiskey because the tax is the same.
Yeah. Yeah, they've really changed the taxation laws a lot over the years. And there's currently an argument out there by some people to bring back the post by ABV, but I don't think that's going to happen. Um, yeah, it's really fascinating too what you kind of hit on a minute ago. Every state is so different with their laws, both for consumption, production, selling, all of it, and yeah, shipping. You can really get into a rabbit hole there, but it does make it very complicated for the producers and people who are whiskey fans too.
Somehow I wonder if there was a follow up to that question.
I mean, I was trying to think of one. Um, my brain isn't running at full speed at the moment.
Yeah. This is a fun milestone for us because this is our first time doing 2 interviews in one week.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so it's entirely possible that Phil and I are both just a little bit frazzled and drained at the moment from having to have researched 2
Yeah.
interviewees in advance. But that's no excuse. We're live, so
Yeah. So I do have a couple more barrel questions because of
Okay.
course I have more barrel questions. I know that you have a interesting and apparently growing more popular barrel storage program where you are palletizing and stacking pallets rather than having racks like a traditional Kentucky rickhouse or like a Scottish style warehouse.
Yeah.
Was what led you to that a consideration of space, or was it a just a system that worked better for you in a variety of ways?
Space was definitely a factor, as was accessibility. We don't rotate our casks, but if they're up, say on the fifth or sixth level, we can just take a forklift, bring it down. I can access, pull samples, put it right back up. It works really great. We can create alleyways and halls, if you will, through the pallets. And it's been working really well for us. It is a different maturation impact on the whiskey because you're going to have no interaction after a while with the one barrel head. So it'll be a different level of headspace with the oxygen, and there'll be a little bit more pressure on different parts of the barrel. For example, around the bung, versus if it was stored separately, so yeah, we had to have specially made pallets that are double reinforced to hold the weight of our sherry butts. They weigh 2,000 pounds approximately each. That was fun to figure out. Okay, we need to have these stored like this and banding to make sure that they stay secure. So it's effort any way you cut it. But we originally were storing a lot of our sherry casks like on a Solera, and you can imagine how Brian, our warehouse manager, felt when I told him I wanted the lower back casks, and he would have to completely disassemble and reassemble. So his life is a lot better with the pallets.
And
So
even then, you're still unstacking if you need to get at the bottom, right?
Yes, but the units are quick to build, and typically I'm working from the top down, so
Hmm.
I can manage that pretty well.
and I guess that would make the access to pulling barrels a lot easier if you can just pull a whole rack of 4 barrels and on a forklift and roll them away, rather than like at a lot of places that I've seen videos of them moving single barrels around by rolling you know everything off of this one rack and down the aisle to get to the
Yeah,
one barrel that they need to repair, or that they're looking to decant or move to the top of the rick house or the bottom of the rick house.
yeah. We won't even have to roll them. We'll keep them on pallets, 2 to 4 at a time, and it speeds up the process too.
I'm
Okay,
sure it
there
also
is a
improves
follow up.
airflow.
Sorry, airflow?
Yeah.
Yeah. We actually have sensors placed around to collect that data, and there are microclimates all throughout the cask house. You can even feel, we have a big fan in the back that we can turn on, so that helps with airflow. But we'll have areas of thermal banding, so we'll have humidity pockets kind of caught. It really is fascinating how different one side or one quadrant of our cask house is from the others. And I like that. And I like leaving the barrels where they are because that way I can get data over the years instead of starting afresh and trying to figure things out.
Yeah, one approach to that, I guess, is the Maker's Mark approach to rotate the barrels through the rick house so that they all get a little exposure to every microclimate.
Yeah, a lot of
And the
work there, and I'd rather handle it on the blending side. I'm good with the differentiation. I'll work it out.
yeah, I wish that we had lots more time to get into the data. I had no idea, but I've always been fascinated by the idea that some distilleries do keep the data. Many don't. As far as I know, they just kind of wing it. Like, there's all those maybe the apocryphal stories of like in Scotland, you get a new still and you put the same dings in it because that
Yeah,
affects how the
the refill.
still operates,
Yeah,
and
And
so you
yeah,
want to have
no,
the same thing to keep your product consistent, and they don't ever try to figure out why. They just do it. And then I imagine I've always kind of imagined there's a lot of distilleries that actually I imagine do keep the as much data really as they can think to keep.
yeah.
Flow rates, temperatures, fill levels, angel share measurements, and all this sorts of stuff. And the obvious follow on to that is like, well, great, data's great.
Mhm.
As a engineer, my question is, how do you visualize that data? How do you react to that data?
Yeah.
Um, or
So
there's always the thing you could collect the data and then not know what to do with it.
right. So Thursdays, 2 p.m., Dustin Castor, our distillery director, and I sit down and we review the data. We have graphs. We work with the sensors placed. We work with 2 different companies. So we have different data points that we've collected. And we look at things like we can actually start to predict leaking barrels even and find them from some of the readings, which is really cool. Um, it's something where I'm looking and trying to just get predictive so I can say these casks are probably going to be higher ABV or lower. If there's a lot of humidity, we're actually seeing a natural reduction in cask because of those humidity pockets. So I like being able to predict that. The bigger temperature swings in those areas, I think, okay, I'm getting more influence from the cask, probably a lot more evaporation too. So those data points are very concrete, and it's helpful to kind of keep an eye on it from week to week. So pulling those reports, I have my login that I try to do every day now. I've just been getting into that, kind of going through and just kind of keeping an eye on any big swings or anything that's really sudden or surprising. So again, yeah, there's not much artistry in that, but I like the science. I like the numbers, and I like making it match the data I'm getting from Pure Sensory.
The artistry is going to come in so you've already said that you're starting to react to what the data is telling you, and you can predict things. So the artistry would come in pushing things a certain way so that you can use them a certain way in the blending room.
Well, a perfect example is originally we were filling our casks at 120 proof, or even as low as 118 our very first few months. And as the data started coming, this is before we'd place sensors, I was seeing after 4 to 5 years, the ABV has gone down. So I talked to Dustin and said, can we bring the entry proof of our casks to 125? And that's what we've been doing for several years now. So perfect example.
So was that defensive against dropping below your product proofs?
Yeah, I realized if there's already going to be that reduction in most of the casks, if not all of them over the years, like there are a couple that it will probably maybe raise up a bit, but I'm not seeing that really. Virginia is incredibly humid, especially where we are. So yeah, it was an adaptation to see, all right, I am expecting these things to happen inside the cask, and I would like to have a little more control.
On the note, I guess, of barrel entry proof, you probably don't have a ton of like sensory data points on it because, like you said, you only were filling barrels for a short time. But I have heard, perhaps just rumored, that the lower your barrel entry point is, the sort of gentler the extraction is, which gets you different kinds of flavors than a higher barrel entry proof. Obviously, you can't change it. It's going to go up or down. You can't change it beyond that point. So there's a lot of nuance here. But did you notice any characteristic flavor differences from the lower barrel entry proofs?
From a chemical standpoint, you're going to pull out different things depending on the water level or percentage versus the alcohol in your distillate. So I know that I'm going to still get enough furfural that I like that almond nougat note. I can predict based on the ABV pretty well. And so I think, yeah, the more vanilla and softer notes, sure, with the water, that's accurate. And for me, I know I can add that if I need to. Okay, there are lots of distilleries that I know in Texas that will add water to their aging casks of whiskey after a couple months. They are combating the more arid, dry environment, and so they're compensating the exact opposite that I was by raising up the entry proof.
So you can add water without changing, I guess, the age of what's in the barrel, but you can't add
Technically,
more
you can proof and
alcohol.
cask. Yeah, it's a certain amount. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. That's an interesting asymmetry I had never really thought about
Yeah.
before.
Yep. I know quite a few distilleries that have done that.
I mean, it makes sense because you've got all sorts of things that are coming out of barrels that hazmat proofs in Texas that, if you aren't careful, is going to be almost undrinkable from the levels of bitter tannics and just, okay, now you've got to proof it down, and how is that at that stage going to affect the flavor?
Yeah.
Oh, this isn't even the best example of this. Hello, Garrison Brothers, 115 proof, but the cowboy bourbon, I think is 120 high something.
Yeah,
See,
they
I've
get up
seen it.
there.
I've seen the Garrison Brothers release at like 134 proof. That, like, I've got something that is 133.1 that is, almost painful to drink at right out of the barrel. I mean, it's still delicious stuff, but you know, especially like when I'm drinking with friends and I'm okay.
Found it.
Yeah.
The Cowboy Bourbon is 131.3 cask strength. A nice round 65.65% alcohol.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten into this one yet, actually, but the Balmoral, the one that was 115 proof, that one is really good.
Nice.
Texas, wild. And yeah, that's one of the few bottles that I still had in my other in my closet across the room instead of in the cabinets behind me. So I had to go get it from over there.
Yeah, I've got that problem over here too. Got a
I,
cabinet full of other whiskeys.
My wife
I
wants the closet back, so that's why those cabinets there, so the closet can be used for. Plus, those have better reinforced shelves. Those are like I had to stop putting things on them for a while. Most of my
Yeah.
samples are over there because they're lighter.
I have a bunch of stuff behind me that is the bulk of what I have, and then I've got two shelves across the room that are all of my Virginia whiskeys.
Oh.
Almost all of my Catoctin Creek, all of my KO Distilling, um, my Copper Fox. Unfortunately, when I put those shelves up, I put them,
Oh, they're
unfortunately, just
tall
put them
bottles.
that tall. So these stay over here.
Yep.
But multiple times I'll be sitting here going, "Oh, I think I should grab a." Oh, it's over there.
Yeah.
Rich says Jacob's Pardon at 71.35%. I have a signatory vintage Bunnahabhain cask at 68.5% alcohol, which is
Wow.
the closest thing I had to the hazmat level at that point.
Bunnahabhain. Wow. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's an experience.
I am
I
imagining.
haven't rated that whiskey yet. I think I don't know how. Like, I mean, that was partly it's just I haven't been paying attention to it for 2 years now, right? I was like, I got that bottle, I tasted it, I shared it with some people because it's laughs to put something that high in alcohol in front of people. But then after that, it's been 70% full for who knows how long, and I haven't gotten around to reviewing it.
Oh,
I think I kind of didn't know how to review it, and then I didn't know what to do with that because the first time I tasted it was like that was surprisingly less painful than I thought, but also just all alcohol. Like that's the experience of that whiskey was, and it was a first fill sherry butt, I think, or sherry
okay.
hogshead,
Wow.
something like that. It's a dark color. Oh, it was only like 6 years old or something like that. Yeah,
Mm.
it's just kind of a wild whiskey all around.
Yeah. Whew.
So
Have you
I
tried
don't know.
anything high?
It,
Do your barrels come out that high ever?
No, never.
None
Never.
of those microclimates make the proof go up.
No, I think I can count on one hand any casks that are higher than 120 proof. Yeah.
It's probably,
The ones I've been pulling after 7 or 8 years. Yeah. Give
more
them enough
nuanced
time, they'll get
probably.
back down. Yeah.
I personally like my whiskeys in the mid to high 50s is sort of the ideal place for
Yeah.
me.
I like that one too.
so on a totally unrelated note, I don't know if this was on your radar last year or the year before. I run the Virginia Whiskey Tournament on Twitter and Instagram and stuff, and I've only done it 2 years. I've been doing it bigger and better every year. Um, but since I have a representative of a Virginia distillery on, I feel like I need to be like, hey, by the way, that's a thing that I've been doing.
Heck yeah.
Um, I I look forward to it every year. The trophy is a Jefferson Cup that I have engraved. Um, Last year, Catoctin Creek won it, and the year before that, it was Falls Church Distillery or Falls Church Distilling Company. Hold on, I gotta check how they. Falls Church Distillers. Sorry.
Okay.
I just because I'm a nerd. I'm doing it all. It's basically runs all summer. So I've started doing the prep work for it, and figured I'd maybe like, hey, that's a thing that I run. And now that Instagram does polls, I have
Yeah.
a broader audience for it. Um,
Yeah, the shakeup with Twitter sort of shook the main vector for that the second year.
Mm.
Unfortunately, people were
yeah,
sort of like, "Do we Twitter? Do we?
Oh,
Where are we
yeah.
supposed to be going?" I don't know
Yeah.
about you, but I tried I tried Mastodon, I tried Blue Sky, I tried when Threads came out, it was like, yeah, that's nice, but it's basically just Instagram, but without the
Yep.
pictures, except still
Yep.
with pictures sometimes. It's very confusing. I don't really know what to do with that platform.
I would give up all social media if I could. I got rid of Facebook years ago and yeah, Twitter too, but I still have Instagram. Yeah.
So yeah, it's basically it's all voting. It's community vote driven.
I love
Phil's
that.
Virginia Whiskey Tournament. And it's great to see. The first year, I think we had better stats on it, where there were thousands of votes in the final
Wow.
bracket, or was it?
yeah. It was about 1,100 votes in the final bracket, and basically it came down to uh, distilleries being able to mobilize their following,
Mm.
which doesn't surprise me terribly much because, again, everything that is done by vote is basically a popularity contest.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But you know, the first year it was really surprising to me that in the first round of votes, and there were only 38 distilleries in the ranking or in the polls that go
Mm.
round. The two of the four biggest distilleries were knocked out of the first round, which
Wow.
sort of I it was one of those like, oh wow, I didn't expect that. And the distillery that won was one of the newest distilleries in the Commonwealth.
Hmm.
Um, and
Social media matters for social media things.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it was just one of those like because you know the distilleries that I expected to do the best because you know marketing presence and quality of product. Not saying that false church distillers don't produce a quality product because they do, but I
Right.
hadn't until they reached the final matchup. I hadn't ever actually heard about them, and I had to go to a store outside of my usual like stomping grounds to find a bottle.
It's even with the ABC control. I guess not every store carries it.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, and the funniest part about that is at the time they were local to me
Hmm.
because that was before they moved to Manassas.
Right.
But last year was a much more competitive bracket all the way through. I did both Instagram and Twitter, and it was a much more competitive bracket. And the final four, I believe, was Virginia Distilling Company, Catoctin Creek.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Copper
We're gonna have to
Fox.
go pull those receipts.
Yeah, I had no idea.
I'm
Yeah.
going to go check that. But you know,
Yep.
shameless self promotion. That is something that I do that I really enjoy doing because
Well,
it's
send
really
me a
cool.
link or whatever on Instagram and I will follow this time. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and we actually we started this channel in April last year, and so we were able to do a series of videos covering almost every, if not every, distillery that was in the bracket.
Yep.
I love it.
So I guess we don't have to do that again this year because there's probably not a whole lot of new information, so we can just point people to the old
Yeah.
information.
Right. And also with the way our format has changed, because we are, getting to interview people such as yourself, we don't have time to do that. We've got
Mm,
more important things to do.
Like
right.
interview the people who win each bracket.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, and actually, somebody was, I forget who it was, but somebody suggested that I should do a Summer of American Single Malt bracket
You
in the
should.
same way, because that would be a good way for me to inventory. So that's a funny thing, isn't it? Right? Like I've asked for inventories of American single malt whiskey distilleries, you know, everywhere that I can, basically. The ASMWC website, of course, has a public list, but there's also the private list of distilleries that, you know, isn't shared publicly. That
Hmm.
Steve Hawley, of course, has,
Right.
but maybe not in like an organized list format, right? Not as such, right? But
Mhm.
there's more information out there.
Right.
And then the only other thing I can do is go state by state and look up every distillery and find out who has an American single malt product. And that's not the kind of research that I want to be burning all my time on.
And it's growing every year, more and more.
There's always going to be more.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, even though that's true, we still have requests like this. I
Oh,
have
yeah.
not seen Courage and Conviction in
North
North Dakota.
Dakota.
Is there a reason?
Yeah, I think we can ship there through online retail partners, but no, we do not have in-state distribution yet there. We're in 27 states, I believe, right now. So we're hopefully going to be there in a year or two. But we started more East Coast, and we're in California, Texas, of course, Nevada. So we are getting there. Just a matter of time.
And there was an earlier question that's related to that. There's a good sort of follow on from the earlier tax question. Does distribution to various states get limited by state licensing concerns?
State laws, yeah. So we have a handful of what we call control states. There is a three-tier system, and Virginia, where we distill, is technically um, one of those control states. So everything goes through Virginia ABC. Pennsylvania is one. In Maryland, you have Montgomery County separate from everything else. So even within a state, you can have different rules and regulations.
Hmm.
And so you could have one distributor partner in one state and you can't have them in another, or it's going to work differently. We have to be licensed as an ABC store in order to sell our own whiskey. We are VA ABC 016. We have our DSP separately, but in order for somebody to walk into our distillery and buy a bottle, they're technically buying it from an ABC store, even though we staff it ourselves. We pay to keep the lights on. We do everything. We send a check to the ABC at the end of every month, and they give us a percentage back. So, welcome to the way it works. It's kind of crazy, and no two states are exactly the same.
Yeah, that is wild. And the difference I just learned recently, the difference between tasting room licenses in Washington State, the difference between a bar license and a tasting room license. In the Washington State tasting room license, you are not restricted to only your own products. I learned this at Westland last week. Um, you are, however, restricted to products made in the state.
Mm.
So all the ingredients that they carry for their cocktails have to be local.
We can use other ingredients for ours, but even the amount of ounces we can pour, it's changed how many percentages. Like it's kind of insane. And even Kentucky had some still does very restricting laws for tasting.
Hmm.
It's yeah, challenging.
And that's always the biggest irony because
Yeah,
of bourbon and
yeah, right.
just
We still have dry counties too. So depending on where you are, what state, you could really have some interesting laws to work with.
yeah. So I usually, as a consumer, I usually find myself thinking, okay, what can I get at the store? Okay, I can't get it at the store. Can I
Mhm.
get it online from the distillery or from somebody who works with the distillery? But I'm not usually thinking about it from the perspective of the distillery wanting to get their product out to
Yeah.
stores in all 50 states.
We
So it's
can
kind of an
ship,
interesting way to sort of flip around that
yeah,
perspective and ask that question from the other end. As a
yeah.
producer, what do you want to achieve for distribution?
We started the Virginia Distillers Association to try to get shipping even within state. So we finally got that just a few years ago because of the pandemic. So now legally we can ship from our distillery to any place within the US. I mean, it can't be some things, but there are limitations on how much, and it has to go through our local ABC store now. So we'll pack it ourselves. We'll drive it to the ABC store, and then the pickup will happen there, which can lead to a lot of confusion, as you can imagine. But, it's the best we have to work with.
Well, all right. It's after 7. I think we've fully exhausted ourselves on questions. Probably a good place to call it, unless Phil has something else in mind.
Well, I was just going to say I did send a screenshot of the final 2 distilleries from the 2023 Virginia Whiskey Tournament.
Let me see if I can get that pulled up.
It's in the thread on for this stream. There we go.
Yeah, I just it's more I have to find the window to share.
Fair enough.
There we go. Yeah.
No way. I love that. Well, Scott and Becky are phenomenal. So what great company to be in.
And I have fun running it every year. I try really hard to let people know about it. At the last couple Spirits Expos, I talked to a lot of people at booths about it. I talked to Rick Wasmond about it briefly, but he was very busy.
My favorite thing about Copper Fox is the malting they do. I think it's so cool.
It is. I mean, they make really. I mean, there are not very many distilleries in Virginia that I have tried that I would say are worth skipping. But I have a short list of distilleries that I try to get everybody to try. Virginia Distillery Company, Catoctin Creek, and Copper Fox are the top 3 of if you want to try Virginia whiskey, that's what I recommend.
I love that. Thank you for sharing the Virginia whiskey love. That's wonderful.
A couple of comments in the chat. I think Rich might be heading out. He said, nice interview. Thanks for joining, Rich. Andrew dropped a comment in chat about what about a here, try this license?
Yes.
Which I think that may be directed at me because I keep pushing things on Andrew. All right, this has been a lovely time, and thank you so much for giving us what is much more time than I think you probably originally intended.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
Yes. Phil, did you remember our agreement on Tuesday about saving little bits of each glass so that we could pour them together at the end? We had this idea for... I always have a tendency to, right, like I put this aside because it was distracting me because it's so good. And I have a tendency to pour half an ounce and then forget about most of it. So I was saying, oh, maybe what we should do is we should just feel free to set aside those glasses of whiskey.
Create your own blend.
And then at the end, blend them all together and do our cheers sign off with our little blend of whiskey. So I think Phil is reconcocting his whiskey blend for the evening. So I will do the same.
That would be about how much I had across.
Oh, that's all you've got left.
You hated it.
But with the double cask that I just poured.
It's entirely possible this is a bad bit.
I mean,
we should probably do this when it's not dead air.
I will say that I don't think it changed it terribly much. Granted, that was a grand total of like 3 drops of...
Yeah, isn't that the funny thing? So I do this from time to time. I poured myself an advent calendar of American single malt whiskeys to take with me, checked baggage on the plane when I went to Texas. And since a lot of those bottles were brand new and full, I had to decant them somehow. So I used my numerous glasses and just poured what I thought was about 2 ounces into each of those. And sometimes I overshot. So I had a bunch of whiskey left over in these glasses at the end. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to pour the rest of this whiskey together into a 2-ounce sample bottle and have my own little advent calendar blend, which I haven't come back and taste yet. So that's I'm going to leave you hanging on that for the moment. But keep an eye on the reviews.
I think
So
the drop of cider cask finish added an interesting sort of bright, like almost Granny Smith like top note in there.
Yeah.
That's about the only difference I can tell in the nose.
what an appropriate thing to be doing with a blender
I love
on
it.
call, right? We're just experimenting. We're reblending VA Distilling Company's various releases. It's always interesting when you do a blend like this. Do the whiskeys all speak? Does one sort of come out and sort of drive everything? Something else entirely. Sometimes you get flavors you wouldn't expect.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, I think I'm getting more than I thought I would of the double cask reserve, considering how powerful the STR single cask is. Like, I think those two are in a very nice balance. I don't think I'm really getting much of the Nancy Fraley batch coming through in this blend, which makes sense
Okay.
because there was a lot less of it when I imported it.
Fair.
Well, anyway, with these lovely blends in hand, lovely company, cheers to blends.
Cheers.
The topic of the evening from top to bottom of the conversation.
Love it.
Until next time, or thanks for watching, and until next time, we'll see you in the lodge. Cheers.
Sláinte.